I'm Chris, and today we're going to fix my starter. Let's do this real quick. We want to start off by removing the battery cables from the battery terminal. This is going to help ensure we don't accidentally create a spark by grounding out the starter when removing it. Now we want to locate the starter within the engine. For my engine, the starter's right in front of the engine, right behind the radiator, underneath the radiator reservoir. It's a good idea to go ahead and remove your air filter or air box, and then I'm also going to take my radiator reservoir and just slightly move that out of the way so I can access my starter a little bit easier. Once you've identified where your starter is in your engine, you want to go ahead and take a look and see how it's mounted to your engine. For mine, there's only 2 bolts holding it in, 1 bolt on either side. Now you can get a clear picture here of where the bolts are for my particular starter in my engine. It might be similar on your engine. Once you've removed those bolts, you can kind of manipulate the starter and move it into a position that's going to make it a little bit easier to disconnect these cables. Go ahead and remove the cable to the solenoid, and then you're going to go ahead and remove the cable that comes straight from the battery. Now this is why we disconnected the battery, because you want to be careful you don't accidentally ground out your wrench to the engine and then create a spark, especially when you're dealing with a car and gasoline and everything. So definitely disconnect the battery first. Once you have everything disconnected, we can go ahead and remove the starter. This is basically what your starter looks like. It's not all that impressive for how much it costs to replace the whole thing, and you don't necessarily need to replace the whole thing. Now here you can see the 2 mounting poles that we removed the bolts from, and then you can see the gear that engages the engine to go ahead and start everything over. Go ahead and remove the 3 bolts to the cover of the housing where the solenoid is located. Be careful when removing the cover because there is a gasket around there. You want to make sure you don't tear that gasket. The solenoid gets energized when it receives power, and when it does that, it's going to go ahead and drive that plunger down and connect the terminals together. Now the one side of the terminal is connected directly to the battery, so that's going to transfer over to the starter, drive that gear out, engage with the engine, and really crank your engine over. It's not a complicated system, but you do have a little bit of a voltage going through there. It could corrode and wear the parts out over time. Now you want to go ahead and remove the nuts from the terminals. There might be more than one nut depending on how everything's put together, but you really want to pay attention to the orientation of the parts that you take out. My best suggestion is lay them out on the table as you take them out and don't move them. Or take a picture as you're taking things out so you know the order of how they go back in. These terminals are going to be the ones that we're going to go ahead and clean up and hopefully reuse and be able to save a little bit of money. Now after you've removed these terminals and paid attention to the orientation of how everything goes, you want to go ahead and clean everything out that's inside there. You don't want to leave any of the dirt, grit, and grime inside there. Especially with the solenoid and the plunger, you want to make sure everything works nice and smooth when you go to crank your car over. You also want to be careful when removing any other parts in there. You don't want to further break anything that you don't have to replace right away, costing you more money. Take your time and work slow. Go ahead and clean the underside of the plunger up with whatever you have. I'm using just some emery paper that I had. You can use sandpaper, you can use a wire brush. I like to clean the terminals up with a wire brush, it was much faster, but again, you can use sandpaper no problem, or even a handheld wire brush. Once everything's cleaned up, you want to go ahead and reassemble everything in the reverse order of which you've taken it out of. That's also where a picture comes in handy, so you remember that order. Or if you laid everything out on the table, definitely a little bit handy to keep everything nice and neat. And don't forget to put the spring back on the solenoid. Once we have everything back together, before you put the cover on, it's time to go ahead and test this. You want to do that by putting your meter on either side of the terminals and really just doing a continuity test. Pushing the plunger down and then seeing if it makes contact. Now you want to make sure the plunger makes contact with both sides of the terminals. Now here I can see that it's only making contact with one side some of the times and both sides some of the times. Now unfortunately for me, you can see here with the old parts, those terminals are just worn down dramatically. And I did everything I could to try to reuse them, but it just wasn't going to happen. I didn't feel comfortable like it was going to be a reliable fix. So what I did was go ahead and order some new terminals. It really cost me nothing. I think it was somewhere between $7 and $16 or something like that. And it came with a plunger as well. Didn't necessarily need the plunger, but you know what? It came with it, so I'm going to reinstall it and I'm going to use that. And then once everything checks out, go ahead and put the cover back on and reinstall it in your car. Now before I bolt the starter back in place, I'm just going to go ahead and take that battery cable terminal and really connect it to the starter. I want to make sure it's connected on there nice. I want to make sure I snug it down real nice, and then go ahead and reconnect the solenoid cable. Once that's all completed, I can go ahead, put the starter back on the mounts, put the bolts back in, tighten them down. Don't forget to reconnect your battery and tighten down your battery terminals. I thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you found this video helpful in fixing your car, please leave a comment below. Thank you guys so much.